Today, we're going to talk about fat loss, not from a place of hype or trends, but through the lens of biology, of neuroscience, of mechanisms. This is about tools, not tricks, science, not speculation. Let's begin with a foundational concept. Fat loss is not just about willpower. It's about understanding the systems that drive behavior and metabolism. Fat is not inherently bad. It's a form of energy storage. Evolutionarily, it kept our ancestors alive. But today, the same biology operates in a world with Uber Eats and high fructose corn syrup. Our environment changed, our brains haven't caught up. So how do we lose fat using science-based tools? Let's begin with a foundational concept. Fat loss is not just about willpower. It's about understanding the systems that drive behavior and metabolism. And one of the most underappreciated systems that plays a crucial role in fat metabolism is the circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythms are 24-hour biological cycles that regulate nearly every function in your body, from hormone release to digestion to temperature regulation. They are primarily governed by light exposure, more specifically by light entering the eyes and signaling to a small region in the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. The SCN acts as the body's master clock, coordinating other peripheral clocks in organs like the liver, pancreas, and fat tissue. This synchronization affects when your body is most efficient at processing nutrients, burning fat, and generating energy. One of the simplest and most powerful tools for aligning your metabolism with your circadian rhythm is getting natural light in your eyes early in the day, ideally within the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking. When you expose your eyes to natural light early, especially from the sun, it triggers a rise in cortisol, which isn't bad in this context. Morning cortisol is part of your biological wake-up signal. It increases alertness, enhances focus, and primes your metabolism for the day. At the same time, early light exposure suppresses melatonin, the hormone that makes you feel sleepy. This helps reinforce the timing of your sleep-wake cycle, making it more likely you'll get quality sleep the following night, which, as we'll explore later, is critical for fat loss as well. People who regularly get morning sunlight exposure tend to have healthier body composition metrics. That's not just correlation. There are mechanistic studies showing that early light anchors the body's metabolic processes, including insulin sensitivity and thermogenesis. In contrast, individuals who are exposed to bright light late at night, especially artificial blue light from phones, tablets, and overhead LEDs, often experience metabolic disruptions. Late night light exposure can shift the circadian clock, suppress melatonin, and impair glucose tolerance the next morning. Even your body temperature follows a circadian pattern. It's lowest about 2 hours before waking and highest in the late afternoon. This affects when you're most primed for physical activity and how your body partitions energy. Eating, sleeping, and exercising at consistent times each day supports circadian alignment, and that alignment supports efficient fat metabolism. An important point here is that this is not about rigid schedules. It's about consistency and light timing. For example, if you wake at 7 a.m., try to get outside within the first hour, preferably with no sunglasses, no windows between your eyes and the sun, and ideally for 5 to 10 minutes, longer if it's overcast. This practice entrains your master clock, and by extension, all the clocks in your body. What you're doing is setting a metabolic foundation for the rest of the day. Your body begins to anticipate feeding, movement, and rest at predictable times, which improves everything from hormone balance to fat oxidation efficiency. NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, is one of the most overlooked yet powerful contributors to daily energy expenditure. Unlike structured workouts, NEAT encompasses all the movements and low-level physical activity we perform throughout the day that aren't classified as deliberate exercise. This includes walking to the mailbox, fidgeting, standing while talking on the phone, taking the stairs, carrying groceries, or even adjusting posture. While each action may seem trivial on its own, together they can account for hundreds, sometimes thousands of calories expended each day. What's fascinating about NEAT is its variability between individuals. Some people naturally incorporate a lot of NEAT into their day without realizing it. They pace while thinking, move their hands when speaking, or prefer to stand rather than sit. Others tend to stay sedentary unless they're exercising intentionally. Research has shown that differences in NEAT can explain why some individuals are more resistant to fat gain, even when consuming the same number of calories as others. In fact, studies from the Mayo Clinic have demonstrated that NEAT can differ by as much as 2,000 calories per day between two individuals of similar body size, depending on their lifestyle and occupational habits. In the context of fat loss, NEAT becomes an essential tool Many people overestimate the impact of a 45-minute gym session and underestimate how much low-level movement can add up. Structured exercise usually accounts for about 5 to 10% of your total daily energy expenditure, while NEAT can account for up to 15 to 30% depending on the person. In a practical sense, this means that increasing NEAT could have a more significant cumulative impact on fat loss than simply adding another formal workout session, especially for those already training regularly. One way to enhance NEAT is to reframe your environment and habits. Rather than thinking in terms of traditional exercise, begin to look for opportunities to build movement into your normal routines. Set a timer to remind yourself to stand or walk every 45 to 60 minutes. Even a 2 to 5 minute movement break, walking around your space, stretching, or doing a few air squats, helps break up long periods of sedentary behavior. These microbursts of activity help regulate blood sugar, support circulation, and contribute to overall energy expenditure. Commuting choices also offer opportunities. Walking or biking short distances instead of driving, parking further away from entrances, or getting off public transport one stop early can meaningfully boost NEAT. Choosing stairs over elevators or using a standing desk for part of your day can also make a difference. Small habits, when performed consistently, become compounding levers for metabolic change. From a neurological standpoint, NEAT is self-reinforcing. As your body and brain adapt to increased daily movement, energy levels tend to rise, making it easier and more enjoyable to move more. This creates a feedback loop. More movement leads to better energy regulation, which leads to more movement. The key is making movement default, not optional. Instead of adding another workout, build a lifestyle that favors motion throughout the day. When we talk about fat loss, most people immediately think of what they eat, calories, macros, or specific food choices. But just as critical as what you eat is when and how you eat. Nutrient timing, meal composition, and the biological mechanisms of satiety all play essential roles in how your body manages hunger, stores fat, and burns energy throughout the day. One of the most impactful strategies is front-loading your nutrition, eating more of your calories earlier in the day, and prioritizing protein-rich meals that support satiety and thermogenesis. Protein is the most thermogenic macronutrient. This means that your body burns more calories digesting and processing protein than it does with fats or carbohydrates. On average, 20-30% of the calories from protein are burned through digestion alone, compared to just 5-10% for carbohydrates and 0-3% for fats. But protein does more than increase energy expenditure. It also modulates key hormones related to hunger and fullness, including GLP-1, peptide Y, and cholecystokinin, which signals satiety to the brain. At the same time, protein intake helps reduce levels of ghrelin, the hormone most responsible for driving hunger. This is why starting your day with a high-protein meal, ideally 30 to 50 grams, is a powerful fat loss tool. Doing so sets the tone for appetite regulation throughout the day. Studies have shown that individuals who consume higher protein in their first meal report fewer cravings, reduced snacking, and better blood glucose stability over the next 24 hours. This stability minimizes the insulin spikes and crashes that often drive overeating and fat storage. In parallel to protein intake, the timing of meals in relation to the circadian rhythm plays a major role in metabolic efficiency. The body's insulin sensitivity is highest in the morning and early afternoon, meaning it is better able to handle glucose and store nutrients appropriately during those hours. As the day progresses, insulin sensitivity naturally declines, and the body becomes more prone to storing rather than utilizing incoming energy. Eating late at night, especially carbohydrate-heavy meals, can lead to higher postprandial glucose levels, impaired fat oxidation, and disrupted sleep, all of which negatively affect fat metabolism. By consolidating food intake into a 10-hour window aligned with the active part of your circadian rhythm, you create metabolic conditions that are more favorable for fat loss. For example, consuming your first meal around 8 a.m. and finishing your last meal by 6 p.m. aligns well with the body's natural insulin sensitivity cycle and provides a nightly fasting window that allows for deeper repair, improved hormonal cycling, and greater fat oxidation during sleep. Equally important is the how of eating. Mindful eating, being present during meals, chewing thoroughly, and avoiding distractions can enhance satiety signals and reduce total caloric intake without conscious restriction. The gut-brain axis, which communicates fullness to the brain, operates with a delay. When you eat quickly or while distracted, it's easier to override these natural stop signals. Slowing down during meals allows the digestive system to send appropriate feedback, making it easier to recognize fullness and avoid overeating. Cold exposure is one of the more unconventional yet increasingly validated tools for fat loss, and its effects go beyond just burning a few extra calories from shivering. The key lies in how cold stimulates specific neural and metabolic pathways, particularly through its impact on brown adipose tissue, also known as brown fat, and the sympathetic nervous system. Unlike white fat, which stores energy, brown fat is metabolically active and burns energy to generate heat, a process called non-shivering thermogenesis. When the body is exposed to cold temperatures, even briefly, it activates the sympathetic nervous system. This results in the release of norepinephrine, a neurochemical that plays a crucial role in initiating thermogenic processes. Norepinephrine binds to receptors on brown fat cells, stimulating them to begin breaking down lipids and glucose to produce heat. Over time, consistent cold exposure not only activates existing brown fat, but can also promote the browning of white fat, transforming some of it into a more metabolically active form with characteristics similar to brown fat. This shift increases overall energy expenditure and can support a greater rate of fat oxidation throughout the day. Interestingly, cold exposure doesn't require long or extreme protocols to be effective. Research shows that short bouts of cold, such as 30 seconds to 3 minutes at the end of a shower, or stepping outside in minimal clothing for a few minutes on a cold morning, can begin to trigger this metabolic response. These small, manageable exposures introduce a mild stress to the system, enough to initiate thermogenesis without overwhelming the body. This concept is known as hormesis, where short-term stress leads to long-term adaptation and resilience. In this case, it results in improved metabolic flexibility and fat-burning capacity. There's also a psychological dimension to cold exposure that is highly relevant to fat loss. Engaging in cold exposure builds mental resilience and increases dopamine, the neurochemical associated with motivation, focus, and drive. Dopamine levels rise significantly following cold exposure and remain elevated for several hours. This increase can enhance energy, elevate mood, and potentially lead to greater consistency with other health supportive behaviors like movement, nutrition, and sleep, creating a feedback loop that supports long-term fat loss. From a hormonal standpoint, cold exposure can positively influence insulin sensitivity and glucose uptake in muscle tissue. As muscles are recruited to generate heat, they begin to draw on circulating glucose for energy, lowering blood sugar levels and improving the body's ability to manage carbohydrates. Improved insulin sensitivity is a key factor in reducing fat storage and enhancing metabolic efficiency. The timing and consistency of cold exposure also matter. Early morning cold exposure in particular can act as a strong wake-up stimulus, reinforcing the circadian rhythm and amplifying the natural cortisol spike that occurs shortly after waking. This helps synchronize the body's biological clocks and further supports metabolic alignment throughout the day. Repeating cold exposure regularly, even just a few times per week, creates cumulative benefits that go beyond the acute calorie burn. It enhances mitochondrial function, upregulates key genes involved in fat oxidation, and increases the baseline level of energy expenditure without requiring additional exercise or dietary changes. Sleep is often treated as a passive state, something we do at the end of the day when everything else is done, but biologically, it's one of the most metabolically active and hormonally important phases in the 24-hour cycle. In the context of fat loss, sleep is not optional or secondary. It is a core pillar that influences hunger regulation, hormone balance, insulin sensitivity, recovery, and ultimately whether your body is in a state of fat storage or fat burning. During sleep, the body goes through multiple cycles of deep and REM sleep, each of which plays a unique role in hormonal regulation. One of the most important hormones influenced by sleep is ghrelin, which increases hunger. When sleep is restricted, even by just a few hours, ghrelin levels rise, particularly in the late evening and early morning, leading to stronger cravings and increased appetite, especially for calorie-dense, carbohydrate-rich foods. At the same time, levels of leptin, the hormone that signals satiety and energy sufficiency, decrease. This combination, high ghrelin and low leptin, creates a biological state that promotes overeating and weight gain, regardless of willpower or conscious decision-making. In addition to appetite hormones, sleep profoundly impacts insulin sensitivity. Just one night of poor sleep can reduce insulin sensitivity by as much as 20 to 30%, making it harder for your cells to absorb glucose from the bloodstream. When glucose isn't efficiently taken up by muscle and liver cells, it remains in circulation and is more likely to be stored as fat, particularly visceral fat around the abdomen. Chronically poor sleep drives the body into a state of metabolic inflexibility, where it becomes less efficient at burning fat and more prone to storing energy. Cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, also follows a circadian rhythm. It should rise in the morning and taper off in the evening. However, poor or inconsistent sleep disrupts this rhythm and often leads to elevated cortisol throughout the day. Elevated cortisol promotes fat storage, especially in the abdominal region, and breaks down muscle tissue over time, which can further impair metabolic rate. On top of that, chronic sleep deprivation raises inflammation markers like C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, both of which have been linked to obesity and metabolic syndrome. One of the most impactful sleep supportive behaviors is maintaining consistency. Going to bed and waking up at the same time every day, even on weekends, helps entrain your circadian rhythm. The brain thrives on regularity. The more consistent your sleep schedule, the more predictable your hormonal cycles become, including melatonin release, growth hormone secretion, and thermoregulation. Growth hormone in particular is released in pulses during deep sleep and plays a major role in fat breakdown and tissue repair. Environmental cues also play a significant role. Exposure to artificial light at night, especially blue light from screens, suppresses melatonin production and delays sleep onset. Creating a wind-down routine, dimming lights, avoiding screens, and engaging in calming activities can help transition the nervous system from a sympathetic fight-or-flight state to a parasympathetic rest and digest state. This shift is essential for falling asleep easily and entering deep restorative sleep stages. Fat loss is often framed as a battle of discipline and effort, but underneath the surface, it is deeply tied to the brain's reward circuitry, especially the neurochemical dopamine. Dopamine is not just about pleasure or the experience of reward. It is primarily about motivation, drive, and the anticipation of outcomes. Understanding how dopamine functions can provide powerful insight into why certain behaviors stick and others fade, and how to make sustainable changes that support long-term fat loss. Dopamine is released in response to behaviors that the brain interprets as rewarding or novel. Importantly, it doesn't just rise after a reward is received. It surges in anticipation of a reward. This means that the way you frame your goals and the value you place on the pursuit of those goals can shape how your brain allocates attention, energy, and motivation. When fat loss is treated as a chore, or when progress is tied solely to external outcomes like the number on a scale, the dopamine system becomes fragile. Delays in reward, such as slow changes in body composition, can cause motivation to crash, leading to inconsistency and self-sabotage. However, when effort itself is associated with reward, something powerful happens. The brain begins to release dopamine in response to the process rather than just the outcome. This shift builds resilience. It creates a self-sustaining loop where the act of eating clean, training, walking, or going to bed early becomes intrinsically rewarding. Neuroscience refers to this as dopaminergic reinforcement, and it is one of the most effective ways to lock in behaviors for the long term. The more you can attach dopamine to the effort, not the result, the more consistent and enjoyable fat loss becomes. Another critical factor is dopamine baseline and how it is regulated. In the modern environment, dopamine spiking stimuli are everywhere. Hyperpalatable foods, social media, digital entertainment. These stimuli cause repeated surges of dopamine, which the brain responds to by lowering its baseline. This is known as the dopamine deficit state, where everyday activities feel dull and motivation declines. In this state, habits that support fat loss, like going for a walk, preparing whole foods, or going to bed on time, feel less appealing compared to instant reward behaviors like scrolling or snacking. This is not a failure of character. It's a reflection of how the reward system has been hijacked. One solution is dopamine recalibration, which involves reducing exposure to artificially high dopamine behaviors and increasing engagement with real-world effort-based rewards. Taking time away from social media, limiting processed food, and creating periods of boredom or low stimulation can help restore the brain's sensitivity to natural rewards. Over time, this resets the baseline and makes lower dopamine but deeply fulfilling activities feel satisfying again. Novelty also plays a role. The dopamine system is responsive to variation, so small changes in routine, trying a new recipe, walking a different route, switching up a workout, can help keep motivation high without abandoning the underlying habits. This blend of consistency and novelty supports both brain chemistry and behavioral sustainability. When the brain is aligned with the body's metabolic needs, fat loss becomes less of a struggle and more of a natural byproduct of a well-regulated system.